Tina woke up gasping, sweat soaked her sheets. She could feel the dampness clinging to her skin, making her shiver despite the warmth of the night. The room was dark, but the terror she felt was palpable, almost as if it had a physical presence. She sat up, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts, trying to shake off the remnants of the nightmare that had gripped her so fiercely. Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum. It felt as though it might burst out of her chest at any moment. She placed a trembling hand over her heart, willing it to slow down, to return to a normal rhythm. But the fear was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, refusing to let her go. The nightmare, it felt so real. Every detail was vivid, every sensation intense. She could still see the dark, shadowy figure that had haunted her dreams, its presence so menacing and oppressive. It was as if the boundary between dream and reality had blurred, leaving her trapped in a waking nightmare. In the dream, a dark figure stalked her. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace, its eyes never leaving her. She could feel its gaze, cold and unrelenting, piercing through the darkness. It was a predator, and she was its prey, caught in a deadly game of cat and mouse. A man with a burned face and a glove of knives. His skin was charred and twisted, a grotesque mask of pain and suffering. The knives on his glove glinted in the dim light, each one sharp and deadly. He was a figure of pure horror, a nightmare made flesh. Tina stumbled out of bed and went to the mirror. She was terrified. Her reflection stared back at her, wide-eyed and pale, a stark contrast to the darkness that surrounded her. She reached out a hand, touching the cool glass, as if to reassure herself that she was awake, that this was real. There, on her nightgown, were 4 long slashes. The fabric was torn, the edges ragged and frayed. She ran her fingers over the cuts, feeling the roughness of the material, the sharpness of the edges. It was as if the nightmare had followed her into the waking world, leaving its mark on her. They looked like they were made by knives. The precision of the cuts, the way they sliced through the fabric with ease, was unmistakable. She could almost hear the sound of the blades, the metallic scrape as they tore through the nightgown. It was a chilling reminder of the danger she had faced in her dream. Her breath caught in her throat. She felt a tightness in her chest, a suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. The fear was overwhelming, a crushing weight that threatened to consume her. She tried to calm herself, to take deep, steady breaths, but the terror was too strong, too real. It wasn't just a dream, something was wrong, very wrong. The slashes on her nightgown, the lingering fear, the sense of being watched, it all pointed to something more sinister. She knew she had to find out what was happening, to uncover the truth behind the nightmare that had invaded her life. But the question was, where to start? And would she be able to face the horrors that awaited her? Tina told her friends about the dream. Nancy listened, her brow furrowed with concern. Glen, Tina's boyfriend, tried to reassure her. Rod, Nancy's boyfriend, just seemed annoyed. But something was happening. Nancy confessed she was having nightmares too. The same man with the knives, the same burned face. Glen admitted he was having similar dreams. Fear, cold and heavy, settled over the group. They were connected somehow, bound to this nightmare man. Tina decided to have a sleepover. Nancy and Glen would stay over. Maybe together they could feel safe. They tried to distract themselves with movies and laughter, but the fear lingered, a shadow in their eyes. As the night deepened, the nightmares returned. Tina fell asleep first. Nancy and Glen watched over her, a sense of dread growing in their stomachs. They knew something terrible was going to happen. A scream ripped through the house. Nancy and Glen shot up. Tina's bed was empty. They could hear her screams coming from the other room. Panic surged through them. They rushed to find her, but it was too late. They found Tina's lifeless body sprawled across the ceiling. Blood stained the walls. Her eyes stared blankly. Freddy Krueger had claimed his first victim. Nancy was devastated, but she was also determined. She had lost her best friend Tina in the most horrific way imaginable. The nightmares that haunted her were not just figments of her imagination, they were real, and they were deadly. Nancy knew she couldn't just sit back and let this happen to anyone else. She had to take action, no matter how scared she was. She knew Freddy was real. The adults in her life dismissed her fears as mere dreams, but Nancy had seen too much to be convinced otherwise. She had witnessed the terror in Tina's eyes, the inexplicable wounds that appeared out of nowhere. Freddy Krueger was not just a story to scare children, he was a living nightmare. She had to find a way to stop him. But how do you fight something that exists only in your dreams? Nancy pondered this question endlessly, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew she needed more information, something concrete that could help her understand what she was up against. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes, the stakes were too high. She started researching old news clippings, anything about unexplained deaths, about nightmares. She spent countless hours in the library, poring over dusty old newspapers and forgotten documents. Every piece of information she found was a small victory, a step closer to understanding the horror that was Freddy Krueger. She learned about other victims, other towns that had been plagued by similar nightmares. She discovered the legend of Freddy Krueger, a child killer who had been burned alive by vengeful parents. The more she read, the more she realized that Freddy's evil had not been extinguished by his death. Instead, it had transformed, allowing him to invade the dreams of the innocent. The parents had thought they were delivering justice, but they had only created a monster that was even harder to fight. Now, he was back, terrorizing their children through their dreams. The realization hit Nancy like a ton of bricks. Freddy was using their dreams as a gateway to continue his reign of terror. She had to find a way to close that gateway, to protect herself and everyone she cared about. But how? The answer seemed just out of reach, always slipping through her fingers. Nancy knew she had to find a way to fight back. She couldn't rely on the adults, they were too blinded by their disbelief. It was up to her and her friends to take matters into their own hands. She started preparing, gathering anything that might help her in the battle against Freddy. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face her fears head-on, for Tina, for herself, and for all the other kids who were still in danger. Nancy's resolve hardened with each passing day. She would not let Freddy win. She would find a way to end his reign of terror once and for all. The fight was just beginning and Nancy was ready to give it everything she had. She was not just a victim, she was a warrior, and she would not rest until Freddy Krueger was defeated. Nancy's mom, Marge, finally revealed the truth. She had been one of the parents who had burned Freddy. He had been killing their children, taking revenge from beyond the grave. Marge hadn't told Nancy everything. Freddy was the son of 100 maniacs, conceived during a brutal assault. He was pure evil, and now, he was back to finish what he started. Glen tried to stay awake. He wanted to protect Nancy, but Freddy was too strong. He pulled Glen into a nightmare. The room twisted and morphed around him. Glen's bed began to shake violently. Blood splattered the walls. Then, silence. Nancy found Glen's room in ruins, his body gone. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that Freddy had taken him. Nancy knew she had to face Freddy alone. She had to draw him out of the dream world. So, she set a trap. She booby-trapped her house, turning it into a battleground. Freddy appeared, his laughter echoing through the house. He lunged at Nancy, his knives glinting in the dim light. But Nancy was ready. She fought back with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. Nancy woke up, her heart pounded in her chest, the remnants of a nightmare still clinging to her consciousness. She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the lingering fear. The room was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt almost unnatural. Sunlight streamed through her window, casting long shadows across the room. It was over. She had defeated Freddy, or so she thought. She went downstairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The house seemed different, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Her mom was making breakfast, the familiar sizzle of bacon and the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air. It was a scene of normalcy, a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed her life recently. Nancy tried to find comfort in the routine, but a nagging feeling of dread lingered. Glen and Rod were there, laughing and joking as if nothing had happened. Their carefree demeanor was almost unsettling, but something wasn't right. Nancy could feel it in her bones. The laughter seemed forced, the smiles too wide. She watched them closely, searching for any sign that they felt it too. There was a coldness in the air, a chill that seemed to seep into her very soul. A sense of unease that she couldn't shake. Then, she saw it. A flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye. She turned, but there was nothing there. Just shadows playing tricks on her mind. Rod and Glen were getting into a car, their laughter echoing in the crisp morning air. Nancy followed them outside, her steps hesitant. The car was familiar, too familiar. It sent a shiver down her spine. A familiar red and green convertible with a license plate that read, "Now It." The sight of it made her blood run cold. Memories of Freddy's attacks flooded her mind, each one more terrifying than the last. She wanted to scream, to warn them, but her voice caught in her throat. Freddy's nursery rhyme echoed in her head, a haunting reminder of the nightmare she thought she had escaped. 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. The words played over and over, a sinister lullaby that refused to be silenced. 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. The shadows seemed to grow darker, the air thicker with tension. Nancy's heart raced as she realized the nightmare was far from over. Freddy was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She had to stay vigilant, to protect herself and her friends. The dawn was cruel, but Nancy was determined to face whatever horrors lay ahead.